Good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
Today we take up Gate 47 of the 108 Gates of Dharma Illumination. So our gate for today says, the mind without enmity and intimacy is a gate of Dharma illumination, for with it, when among enemies and intimates, we are impartial. So for once, this is a pretty straightforward Dharma gate. Immediately, of course, we start thinking about picking and choosing and chasing after and running away and all those kinds of familiar teachings, all the things that go with discriminative thinking, right? So intimacy is something that comes up frequently in the teachings. Also, the term used here for impartial has some particular meanings within the Buddhist tradition, within the Buddhist context, so we need to investigate both of those things today. So, well, enmity, what is that? It is harboring resentment, right? Holding a grudge, bearing malice, having ill will, the desire to do some kind of harm to other beings. Intimacy, on the other hand, in the usual sense, is about affection, right? It's about something which is familiar. It's about closeness. There's a feeling of trust that the person or the form that we're encountering isn't a threat to us, doesn't wish us any kind of harm. In the kanji, there's also some connotation of parental mind, right? So we'll talk about that in a minute. So it's a slightly different way of considering likes and dislikes, right? It's not just about I like yellow better than purple, or I drink tea because I don't like coffee. It's a different way to look at this whole discriminating mind. So we think of our enemies and our intimates as people, but of course, really this gate is talking about anything we encounter, right? We can consider anything to be an enemy, whether or not it's a sentient being. We can consider anything to be an intimate, whether or not it's a sentient being. So we feel intimate and comfortable with the things we like, and we feel some suspicion or some discomfort with things that we don't like so much. So we're kind of dividing up the world. I like this, I don't like that. Or I feel comfortable with this and I don't feel comfortable with that. But intimacy in Zen is also, of course, about non-separation. Being intimate with things is seeing interconnectedness. This is a teaching which I'm sure you've encountered already somewhere. Intimacy is about seeing the interconnectedness that's already there. So it's also about seeing clearly the whole story of this moment. Not just my preconceptions, not just my ideas, not just the parts that I like, or the parts I'm predisposed to be comfortable with, or the parts I'm even predisposed to be aware of. So if you're really intimate with this moment, or you're really intimate with an object, you accept it in its entirety, not just the parts you like, or the parts you've seen before. So let's start with the individual self version of intimacy, and then let's look at the larger sort of universal self version of intimacy. So we all have friends and family with whom we feel comfortable, with whom we feel close and intimate. We know things about them. They know things about us. There's a trust relationship there. We accept each other, kind of warts and all. We feel like we can be our authentic selves with our intimates. We don't have to try to be somebody else or cover up things about ourselves we're not comfortable with, right? There's a real feeling of closeness with these people with whom we feel intimate. So we say things like, so-and-so is my other half, right? Or, so-and-so is my soulmate, or my child, feels like a part of me, because there's this feeling of interconnectedness. So we recognize what we share. And even in those areas where we differ, we can appreciate that that person has some interest or some skill maybe in some area that we don't have. We can appreciate that difference and not break the closeness, right? You can do something I can't do. I can be proud of you for that. I can still feel close to you because of that. Even if we share a difference of, have a difference of opinion, I can respect that you have a difference of opinion from mine, right? So we don't break that feeling of closeness. It might feel in some ways like we're sort of complementary, right? We're two parts of some whole thing. I have a Dharma sister, for instance, who is great at tangible, detailed stuff in a way I will never be. When I have to pack the car, I call her, right? She is great at packing boxes and suitcases and navigating the world without getting lost. And these are not things I'm good at, right? I'm really hopeless at that stuff. My contribution is the big picture thinking. I'm the one who makes the plan, or I'm the one who does the creative problem solving, right? So in that way, we are complementary, even though we're quite different. I can appreciate that she can do things that I can't do. And so we can feel like there's still some closeness there, even though we are in no way identical. We are quite different. So diverse elements can function together as a whole without actually being identical. And if I'm carrying the idea that, we can't be friends somehow because our karmic conditions are different, then I'm really ignoring intimacy. I'm really ignoring the interconnection that's already there. So an important part of intimacy is being willing to let go of the preconceptions that we have, the preconceptions that we carry about what we're encountering, whether that's other people or things or situations. If we can drop this preconceived ideas, we have some hope of reconnecting with intimacy. Otherwise, those ideas are what creates the barrier. Those ideas are what creates the separation. So we have to be willing to experience directly whatever we're encountering without the buffer or the mediation of our ideas that, those ideas are trying to make us comfortable with something. How would it be if we encountered directly whatever we were encountering without that mediation, right? Without that buffer? That can be scary. That can be really scary, which is why faith and trust are important and why those are important elements of intimacy. If I'm with my intimates, I can let go of the barriers. I can let down the barriers and be who I really am and have some faith, some trust that I will not be injured in that circumstance. So a moment ago, I said that one aspect of intimacy is that trust with this person or this object, that this, whatever it is not a threat. It's not out to cause me harm. When a feeling of mistrust comes up, I think we can take a moment to try to discern what's actually being threatened, right? If the mountain lion is about to spring down from the boulder and get you, clearly there is a danger. Clearly the threat is there, and please run away as fast as you can. Otherwise, let's look carefully at what's actually being threatened. If what's being threatened is the ego, then it might be possible to see that this is not a life and death situation. This is not the mountain lion about to spring down and eat me. This is my ego getting a bump. And is that a life and death situation where I need to take some retaliatory action? Or can I say, that stung. That's my ego being pushed a bit. Maybe defense and retribution aren't entirely necessary. Maybe the defensiveness prevents me from seeing clearly the entirety of this moment and prevents me from being intimate with what's actually happening. Because, of course, I want to put a barrier there. Well, what if I don't do that? What would that be like? And what might I learn? And how might I experience intimacy in a different kind of way? So I also mentioned that intimacy has this element of parental mind or nurturing mind. This, of course, is one of the three minds for which Sanshin is named. So we hear about joyful mind, we hear about nurturing or parental mind, and we hear about magnanimous mind. These three minds are Sanshin, right? So Dogen talked about these, of course, in the Tenzo Kyokan. Nurturing mind, literally old mind, mind of a grandmother. It's like the attitude of this kindly grandmother or a parent who really enjoys caring for others. Really, sees these beings as children, as her children, and enjoys caring for them. So this is the spirit of the Bodhisattva, right? If you're focused on caring for somebody else, it's pretty tough to put up a barrier between, you and the person you're caring for. Non-separation arises kind of naturally because you're focused on caring for somebody else, seeing somebody else's needs, seeing somebody else's situation. So if you put aside small self and look carefully at the other person or at the object you're encountering or the circumstances you find yourself in, there is some hope there for intimacy. So the same thing happens in the way we care for tools or belongings. In the training temple, we're taught to carry everything with two hands. Not just, the statue of Buddha that you're moving from one place to another, but really the teaching is you carry everything with two hands. You don't just wave things around kind of casually, right? It's a way to practice paying attention to what we're doing and to practice seeing clearly our relationship with the things that we're using. These things are taking care of us and we need to take care of them. So we're treating them with this kind of grandmotherly mind. So if we're carrying a teapot, sometimes we're serving people or we're doing a meal, we're carrying a teapot. You don't just wave the teapot around. You actually carry that teapot handle with two hands and you pour with two hands, right? If you're opening a sliding door, you actually get down, you kneel down, two hands, open the door, Go through, kneel down again, 2 hands, close the door. If you're going in to see, your teacher or something, that's the way you go in. So you're being very mindful, right? You're being very aware. 2 hands. You don't just kind of throw that door open. Hi, teacher. It's you get down, you open the door, you close the door, right? So it's again a way of practicing this kind of intimacy. Partly this is a cultural thing. It's not something you only will find in the training temple. If you're in a business situation, you meet somebody, you hand off a business card, you will hand it with 2 hands, and it will be accepted with 2 hands. You don't just throw somebody a business card. You hand it over. Not only that, if you're accepting a business card, you have to actually look at it and read it. You don't just go, thanks. Right? So all of this handling of things is done very carefully with 2 hands, with this kind of parental mind. So it's a great practice of cultivating that kind of old mind, grandmotherly mind. You must be intimate with things, and you must be intimate with what's happening. If you're opening that door, you've got to pay attention opening the door. You're not already on, what am I going to say to the person on the other side of the door, right? You have to pay attention to what's happening in these circumstances. So Dogen says, when you're the cook, of course, you should handle each grain of rice as though you were handling your own eyeballs, which is a wonderful reminder that the things we're encountering and the things with which we're interacting are not separate from this one. What if we handled everything as though we were handling our own eyeballs? It's an important manifestation of understanding, handling everything as if it was myself, because it is, right? It's a great reminder of that. So people describe teachers like Iko Narasaki Roshi, who was one of Zuiko Redding's teachers. People describe how he would always handle his teacup with 2 hands. He'd pick up his tea, he'd drink and put it down, always with 2 hands. So there's none of this gradually, grabbing the cup and swilling down the tea. He's, he did the same thing with his eating bowls, everything with 2 hands. So of course it's possible to take care of someone else or something else or your circumstances and remain completely inside your own story, right? We can convince ourselves that we are doing everything we need to do in this moment. We're taking care of other beings and what needs to happen, and we never actually step outside our own story. So, your friend comes to you and asks for help, and you offer what you would want, or you offer what you have right now, without looking carefully at what does my friend actually need. And that friend can't always tell you that, right? So there's some discernment that can happen when intimacy is there about what that person actually needs. So, we offer something, but we're doing that thinking about our own self-image. Either, am I not a wonderful friend because I'm offering this thing? Or am I not the world's biggest martyr because I'm putting aside my own needs and I'm, focusing completely on the other person? I'm a martyr, I'm a hero, I'm a superior practitioner because I'm, offering whatever I'm offering. Well, of course, that's all just an ego trip, right? That's all just another set of ideas about who we are. So, there's intimacy is limited when we're in that kind of space. So the other trap we can fall into is thinking that compassion is an emotion, and I'm sure we've talked about this before. I've talked about this with other classes. We can think, well, compassion is something I feel, and therefore only certain people that I encounter actually deserve my compassion. Or, I don't need, there's a certain segment of the world that I don't need to worry about when it comes to compassion. I can generate compassion for the family and friends with whom I'm intimate, but, so much for people I don't know or people I don't like very much, or someone's done something I don't agree with. It's more difficult to generate or to feel that compassion. So as bodhisattvas, of course, there is nobody outside of our compassion, because compassion is based on our understanding of interconnectedness. It's not my personal emotion about who do I like today. It's what arises naturally when we have the wisdom to see interconnectedness. We already know there's no separation. So, we might choose to ignore it. I don't agree with this person, so I'm ignoring that we are actually connected in some way, and I'm not going to, bother with getting to that feeling of intimacy and compassion. So one of the people we're most afraid of being intimate with, I think, is ourselves. Because there are things about ourselves we don't kind of want to look at. We don't want to admit that they're there. It's difficult to see and accept our own delusion or our own mistakes or our own unskillful action, and to forgive ourselves for that. So, we are not outside of compassion either. That doesn't mean that we let ourselves off the hook, that we make excuses for what we did. The same as would be true for anybody else. If we've made mistakes, we need to, do something about that. If we see our own delusion, we need to, try to see through that and do something about that. But we also can forgive ourselves. And that's what vow and repentance are about, right? We get to sort of reset and say, yes, in the past I made a mistake. I'm going to see what went on there. I'm going to aspire not to make that mistake again. And we don't cut off this connection with ourselves. A lot of our practice, I think, is about reintegration, becoming intimate with who we actually are. And yeah, we're flawed beings. We need to be intimate with that and accept that too. One of the things that's happening in our Zazen is that we are becoming more intimate with ourselves. We get to sit there and face the wall and face ourselves for 50 minutes at a time. And really drop the barriers between ourselves and ourselves, right? We get to see clearly what this self is, how these five skandhas are clinging to five skandhas, what we're actually made up and what we're actually doing. And in that way, we become more intimate with the individual self and also with the universal self. So we get to see what's happening in this body and mind. We get to see how we're generating karma and where we're going off the rails. And also, we get to drop the barriers and have a direct experience of the universal self and the interconnectedness and the intimacy with the universal self. So Sawaki Roshi said, Zazen is basically becoming intimate with the self, the dharma of becoming you. So of course you're already you, but do you recognize it? Can you be intimate with that? In that way, in Zazen, we sort of become ourselves, become more ourselves. So sitting without gaining mind and sitting without ideas is about the five skandhas. Sitting without gaining ideas about the five skandhas is really about, fully manifesting our true selves. It's about really being intimate with the true self, the universal self, and fully manifesting that. So then we can become intimate with ourselves based on our own direct experience rather than having that experience sort of mediated or buffered by our thinking. So we might be sometimes not so comfortable with ourselves, and we like to write a story there, and we like to do some mediating there and some buffering. But, what if we don't do that and we are intimate with what's really happening here? How would that be? Hojo-san would say that's when five skandhas sort of give up clinging to five skandhas. So all this intimacy sounds like a good and wise and wonderful thing, a skillful thing, and yet the gate statement says being impartial without enmity or intimacy is also a good and wise and skillful thing. So what's happening here? Well, guess what? Of course, both of these things are true. Intimacy is a good and wonderful thing because it's already there. We're not going to change that. And also, being in a place of impartiality is also good and true. So, like, welcome to Zen, right? This pattern occurs over and over and over again. So now we get to talk about going beyond intimacy and enmity. So if we see and deeply understand the intimacy of the individual self, then we can also see intimacy with the universal self. So here's the ground of our practice, right? Here are the causes and conditions, and we get to use that to see this clearly and to go beyond that to the universal self. So if we can see through our ideas about intimacy, then we get to true intimacy, right? It's when we have some preconception about what intimacy is or how it works or what it does. Yeah, we're moving in the right direction, but there's still this barrier. There's still this thought covering, right? So can we use our karmic circumstances to transcend our karmic circumstances? There's a famous story about a 10th century Chinese monk, which you have probably heard. This monk is called Fa Yen, and he gets caught in a snowstorm. He's traveling and he gets caught in a snowstorm. He takes refuge with another monk called Lohan. Lohan asked Fa Yen, "Where are you going?" Fa Yen replied, "I am traveling around on pilgrimage." Lohan said, "What's the purpose of pilgrimage?" Fa Yen replied, "I don't know." Lohan said, "Not knowing is most intimate." So that's a very famous phrase in our tradition, right? Not knowing is most intimate. If Fa Yen had had some idea about his pilgrimage, what he was doing or what the outcome was supposed to be or what he was supposed to be finding or seeing, then he would have missed a lot of things, probably. He might have experienced only those things that he was prepared to experience. Or he might have seen only those things he was looking to see. And we've all had that experience, right? We see what we're looking for. We don't see the rest of the story. So, instead, how about just approaching each moment with the spirit of inquiry and accepting it for, what what it is. If he can do his pilgrimage in that way and approach this with a not knowing mind, then he can be really intimate with what's going on. He can be really intimate with what he's encountering and what he's finding and what he's seeing and what's happening around him. So, he doesn't have these barriers of preconception. So not knowing ahead of time, not having an idea is most intimate. So in the Zui Monkey, Dogen says something similar to this about intimacy in Zazen. In Zen, the way is attained with both body and mind. If you contemplate Buddhism with the mind alone, you won't be able to attain the way in 10,000 kalpas, nor in 1,000 lifetimes. You attain the way when you let go of your thoughts and give up intellectual and conceptual understanding. Those who gain Satori by seeing blossoms or hearing sounds achieved it through the body. Therefore, if you cast aside completely the thoughts and concepts of the mind and just do Zazen, you attain to an intimacy with the way. The attainment of the way is truly accomplished with the body. For this reason, I urge you to just do Zazen. So he's referring to older stories about, people see a plum blossom and have an awakening experience, or people, hear a pebble hitting a bucket and they have an awakening experience, right? He's saying all of that was done with the body, not just with the mind. So simply to have an idea about the world is to put up a barrier and block a certain amount of intimacy with the way. So Zazen doesn't require us just to use discursive thinking in the way that we have to when we negotiate our lives kind of off the cushion, right? Zazen is our opportunity to sit down and sort of put that over here. It's our opportunity to put down these thoughts and concepts and take down the barriers, right? Maybe you've had some experience of sitting sesshin where you didn't necessarily know everybody you were sitting with. They might have come from all over the world, as typically would happen in the before times at Sanshin. We'd have a room full of people from literally everywhere. We spend 3 or 5 or 7 days in complete silence. We're not chatting each other up. We don't know anything about how everybody's doing. We're not sharing stories. But somehow by the end of that time, we are all quite intimate with each other. We know how people walk. We know how they breathe. If you've got people sitting next to you either side, you know how they move. And yet you might not even really remember their name, right? It's really interesting when you're sitting Zazen together with people in that way. The same thing can happen if you're chanting with people every morning. Again, in the before times, we do liturgy. We start to know how we chant together, how we move together. That is nothing about this. That is simply about dropping the barriers and really recognizing, directly experiencing this kind of intimacy with people. So sitting in Zazen, we're opening the hand of thought. We can experience this perhaps a bit more directly. Intimacy with the way is already there, whatever we're doing, whether it's Zazen or cutting the grass, that intimacy with the way is already there. But somehow when we're sitting Zazen, it's a more direct, perhaps, way to experience that. We're not distracted by the need for other kinds of discursive thinking, and we can really get to that place, right? So real intimacy is not the intimacy of being close necessarily with our particular friends or family or the favorite teacup or whatever those familiar things are. It's having the wisdom not to get caught up in having to decide where intimacy is and where it isn't. We don't need to be making those choices. Who are my intimates and who are my enemies? We don't need to be making that choice. Real intimacy is not having any ideas about intimacy and enmity and impartiality. So Sawaki Roshi says, again, in everything people follow their feelings of joy, anger, sadness, and comfort. But that's something different from everyday mind. Everyday mind means ceasefire. Without preferences, without animosity, without winner and loser, without good and evil, without joy and pain, that's everyday mind. So I need to, without making too much of a digression here, let me just say everyday mind here is not our everyday sort of discursive, diluted, human thinking. Terms like everyday mind or ordinary mind are pointing to the original direct experience before we start poking our heads in. So this is what's going on before I have an idea about it, or before I have a preference about it, or I start writing a story about it. So when he's talking about everyday mind, that's what he's talking about. Sawaki Roshi's talking about the ceasefire of original experience before preferences. So if we can get to that place, that kind of impartiality, before picking and choosing and clinging and running away and all of that stuff, that's what he's talking about. And I think it's interesting that he calls that ceasefire, right? We can stop shooting at stuff, right? We can be right in the middle of that. So our original mind sees interconnectedness within this one unified reality, and our original mind sees there's nothing outside of that. So this is how we go beyond intimacy and enmity and get to impartiality. The Japanese word here, by the way, is byodo. Maybe you've heard this word before. When we add the word onshin before byodo, we get onshin byodo as a phrase. It means that the enemy and the ally are equal, or that we treat hate and love alike, if you will. So it's important within Japanese Buddhist culture. You run into this onshin byodo. For instance, in Japan, there are stone monuments and memorials that for people who died on both sides of a battle. So here's a monument to all the people who were lost, not just the people on my side, right? Which is kind of interesting. The point is that the living need to transcend hatred to help the dead be reborn in Amida's pure land. So this is where the Buddhist piece comes in, right? It's like, people were lost, and now we all need to come together to honor those people and help them be reborn in Amida's pure land, where everybody's treated equally and everybody's treated impartially. So when two samurai would fight a duel and then one would die, the other would bow to the corpse and pray for him, right? So enemy and ally being treated equally. After a battle, the warlords prayed not only for their own fallen soldiers, but also for the fallen soldiers on the other side. So there's this thread that runs through, we have a disagreement, we have a battle, we have something happen. And in the end, we honor the fact that, everybody is human. Everybody has suffering. So during a conflict, people had to fight each other. And then afterwards, they would take the larger view that intimates and enemies are equally important, right? They all have loved ones. They're all loved by others. Their lives are unique. They made some contribution. As individuals, they were important. And friends and enemies are all living one interconnected life. So how do we ignore half of that? It stops making sense. So the practice was to let go of picking and choosing based on sort of personal circumstances, personal emotion, and care for everybody. Because we know, at the end of a battle like that, golly, everybody needs care. So imagine if that's what was happening in our country right now, right? What a difficult, painful, important practice this is or could be. What if we could see the other side as human beings who are doing their best to live and care for the people in their own lives and the people, that are important to them? And what if we could do that sincerely and not simply with nice words about let's all get along, right? What if we could actually commit to that as skillful action? We'll help bury your dead and pray for their safe passage. How would that be? So the mind without enmity and intimacy is a gate of Dharma illumination, for with it, when among enemies and intimates, we are impartial. So while we certainly have to recognize individuality and recognize the particulars of various circumstances, we can't let go of that. We have to do that. That's called sabetsu. Sabetsu is the word for that. So, on the one hand, we have to recognize form. We have to recognize distinctions, individuals, particular circumstances, right? We need the sabetsu. We also need the byodo, or the equality, or the impartiality. Sabetsu and byodo are two sides of one whole universe. So we have, again, we can think about merging of difference and sameness. We can think about, form and emptiness, not two. Right? So this is kind of a familiar pattern, a familiar theme. Hojo-san uses the image of 5 fingers and 1 hand, right? He says we've got 5 individual fingers. They are not the same. They each function differently. They have, we use them differently, and yet there's 1 hand. And these are both true, and these things are not separate. So we have sabetsu and we also have byodo. So seeing how everything is different and independent on the one side is important, and seeing, the equality and their interconnectedness on the other side. Holding these two truths is important in the Mahayana tradition as a whole. So this is not new territory for us. So Hojo-san says, Buddha's awakening is the way to see things equally without any discrimination. The Buddha's wisdom is called Great Perfect Mirror Wisdom. The mirror reflects everything as it is without any distortion. Another name of Buddha's wisdom is Byodo Shochi, wisdom which sees the nature of equality. So here's Byodo again. So this is interesting. The mirror reflects everything as it is without distortion. So both sabetsu, or distinction, and byodo, or equality, are already there, right? Distortion is seeing or acting on only one or the other, like all the time, right? So if we can't see both, if we can't take both into account, if we can't hold both of these truths, then we have distortion. Then the mirror is distorted. And what we're manifesting in the world is not entirely balanced, right? It's not a clear reflection of reality. So, there's a contest, and after the contest, we clean up the mess, right? So if in the heat of the moment, we can't see any other kind of byodo in the other side, whatever the other side is, at least we can acknowledge the Four Noble Truths, right? This is so basic to our practice. If nothing else, if we can't get to any other kind of impartiality, we can recognize the Four Noble Truths. We can recognize all of us who have this human form have delusion. We've all created some suffering for ourselves, right? We're all in the grip of something. We all have that as common ground, even if we can't find anything else. So my suffering is not identical to your suffering because my causes and conditions are different from yours. The way that I'm suffering with something is not the way you would react, or maybe that wouldn't even be something that causes you suffering. Maybe my suffering is, greater or lesser than yours. So, the teaching is not all suffering is identical, because we know it's not. Each individual has certain causes and conditions. But nobody's free from suffering. So no matter what kind of a front we put up, no matter how hard we might try to deny our suffering or deny the suffering of others, in the end, at the end of the day, in this human form, Buddha says we've all got some kind of suffering. Can we not come together at least around that? So rather than coming together to help each other with our suffering, or help each other bury all of our dead and pray for all of our safe passage, sometimes we choose to ignore that, or we just don't want to see it. We can create separation based on whether my suffering is more important than yours, or my suffering is bigger than yours, or it's more righteous, or it's more deeply held. So even in the midst of this common ground of suffering, which goes all the way back to the Buddhist earliest teachings, we can still create some barriers, and we can still lose the intimacy, right? We all have suffering, but golly, my suffering somehow is better than yours, or more important than yours, or, I have a right to mine more than you have a right to yours. What? Let's look carefully at what's going on there. So, since Tuesday's elections, of course, like everyone else, I've been reading around about stuff, and I've been trying to understand why voters support particular candidates, because it's an interesting study in human nature. No matter, who you voted for and what side you're on and who you agree with, it's really interesting to look at why do people make the choices that they make. This is something I'm always kind of interested in. So, after all, things happened this week that, the experts didn't expect. People didn't do what, others expected them to do. The margins were thinner. People who should have voted one way voted another way. So it's like human beings, you can't predict what is going on there. So it's really interesting study, I think, in how we judge our own suffering and how we judge the suffering of other beings. So some people can feel oppressed, can feel disregarded because of their race or gender or culture or whatever characteristic you want to point to. Some white men feel that no matter what they actually think or say or do, 3 places we create karma, somehow they're being held accountable for the suffering of anybody who's not a white man. We have, people of all descriptions feeling powerless in their own lives, and so they may feel drawn to a candidate or a leader who seems like he or she will do whatever it takes to do whatever is necessary. People on all sides, sort of can cast their vote on the basis of who's the least objectionable. Well, I don't like my guy, but he's better than the other guy, and the other guy isn't going to do anything about my suffering. So it's really interesting to think about, how do we make those kinds of choices? None of those kinds of suffering is new. It's not that any of this hasn't been around for a while, but depending on what kind of communications we pay attention to, it's entirely possible to be completely unaware of somebody else's brand of suffering. Just, to be unaware that it's even out there. Maybe it's not okay to talk about it. Maybe it's happening in a part of the culture or a part of the country that we're not in. So as a bodhisattva, job one is don't look away, right? Job one is accept that there is suffering. You don't have to agree with the basis of it. It doesn't have to be your suffering. But one of the ways we get past the intimacy and enmity kind of distinction is, can I recognize somebody else's suffering? And can I honor that? I don't have to take it on. It doesn't have to be mine, but I have to kind of know that it's there. So, we can set to arguing about what kind of suffering is most urgent, what kind of suffering is most deserving, whose problems get solved first, or whose problems get solved at all. In the midst of these competing forms of suffering, how do we choose a direction? How do we decide what direction to take? Resources are limited. Attention spans are limited. We can only do so much as bodhisattvas. So, yikes, that's a big choice. So Sawaki Roshi says, everyone should sit firmly anchored in the place where there is no better and worse. Your whole life, you're completely out of your mind because you think it's obvious that there is a you and the others. You put on an act to stand out in the crowd, but in reality, there's neither you nor the others. Buddha Dharma means seamlessness. What seam runs between you and me? Sooner or later, we all end up acting as if a seam separates friend and foe. When we get too used to this, we believe that the seam really exists. Poor and rich, important and unimportant, none of that exists. It's only glitter on the waves. So at this point, it would be easy to say, yeah, here we go again. Can't we all just get along? Hearts and flowers, nice words, Can we get beyond the surface of that? Messages about peace and harmony can become kind of trite, right? It's like here we're hearing it again. Let's all just be nice to each other. Let's all, sort of kiss and make up. And you just think, is there any meaning in that? If only it were really that easy. And, this is topical because of what week it is, but I think just generally in our lives, even in our practice, we hear a lot about peace and harmony. Well, let's all just, sort of get along. Let's strive for peace and harmony. That sounds nice, and that's an important teaching, but then what, right? It's not enough just to say nice things. We have to actually commit to starting here and saying, where am I stuck? What am I not seeing, right? What piece am I missing? There's work that I have to do here. So the nice words are good, and they can set an aspiration and they can set an intention, but after that, there's a vow, right? There's an aspiration. There's a commitment to practice and to seeing deeply and seeing clearly. How can I come to understand somebody else's point of view? The other side, although that's maybe an unfortunate way to look at it. How do I come to understand the other side's point of view? Don't have to agree with it. Don't have to adopt it. Can I at least get into that space enough to say, how does somebody make a choice? What suffering is being addressed? What suffering is being ignored? What very common human circumstance leads to somebody making a choice like that? So, how does this person's point of view maybe arise? We can't completely know that, but we can make some attempt, right? So how can I see the seam and also the seamlessness? How can I see the distinction and not ignore that, and also not ignore the seamlessness, the interconnection, the going beyond intimacy and enmity that's already there? So in what ways am I assuming that seam is there? And why do I think so, right? And how am I maybe ignoring the seamlessness, and how, why am I doing that? So can I see clearly my allies and the people who oppose me, and also see them equally? Can I see the distinction? And can I see the Saibetsu? Can I also see the Byodo? So, and by the way, seeing with impartiality does not mean being condescending. It would be easy to say, well, I forgive you for your massive delusion because, I'm more enlightened than you. So I'm, I can see that you're caught up in the three poisons, but somehow I'm not. And I can see what's happening with you, because somehow I'm better. It's like, oh no, that's not equality. That's an ego trip. And it's so easy to get caught up in that. And we even do that when we're trying to have some empathy, oh, I'm going to have pity for somebody, about their delusion. Well, that's not actually equality, is it? That's me, and then there's you, and I'm writing another story. So we have to be really careful about the subtleties of this equality or this impartiality. So our friends and family, are not identical with the people who might oppose us. We don't have to pretend that they're the same. We don't have to give up feeling intimate with some people and, frankly, acknowledging we're not comfortable with other people. So it's not like we need to just whitewash that. There's a distinction there. That is reality. We don't have to pretend that it's not there. We just have to be able to see that in addition to being across the seam from somebody, there's also no seam. There's also already.
Okay. Hoko's internet connection is completely down. However, she still wants to open up things for discussion. I'm sure folks have things to talk about, especially considering recent events. Does anybody have anything to say? The floor is open. What would people like to talk about?
Well, I'm going to share a question that was asked. This is not my question, but it was asked last night, actually, in a small, brief gathering of some friends, and the question was, how is it that the country is so almost perfectly divided? It's not that there are just two sides, and everything else that can go along with that, and
Yeah.
divisiveness and the extremes and so forth, but that the numbers, I mean, that's coming down to, out of 140 million voters, it's a handful, just the noise, the dust.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's not the first time. I mean, but this one is quite dramatic. But what is the nature of this phenomenon that it happens? You have these strong opinions. That's its own story, and then we can somehow, as this entity, just bifurcate.
I know, and to expand on that at least a little bit is I have family that are Trumpites. There might be people here that are, but I mean, I think of family and friends that our intimacy has changed, but it's not like, okay, my brother voted for Trump and I know he voted for him again. But we still talk. And there's certain places we don't go to, but I still really like my brother. And it kind of speaks directly to this gate. And something else I was thinking about was part of what practice is for us when we practice intensely, say in sesshin. You notice your discomfort. You notice how much your mind is going to the averse side. You don't want to be here. You don't want to keep doing this. Your body hurts. You're doing one thing or another to kind of keep yourself distracted. Your mind does things automatically to entertain yourself. So you're kind of not there really. And then I was thinking about something that Trungpa used to talk about was how to become, how to relax within your discomfort. And it's kind of a hard thing to do when you think about it, hard thing to maintain. But that to me talks about what really our practice is. How do you relax? How does your mind relax within whatever your discomfort is? And it really, I think, comes down to the idea that you're not discriminating whatever's going on. The moment is the moment, no matter how you feel. Otherwise, you're just always reaching for what makes you happy or what will relieve that discomfort. So there's my comment. Sagan.
Yeah, what you just said reminded me a lot of the story. A monk asked, "What do we do when it's so hot? When the weather is terribly hot, and what do we do when it's terribly cold?" And the answer was, be completely hot or be completely cold at that moment. And that sort of is the liberation. It's like being completely in that state and not objecting to it in a sense.
Yeah, yeah. Well, some of you may have heard this story before, but in the early days of Sanshin, I think it was maybe I think it was a 5-day sesshin, a typical kind of en taiji sesshin. And Some of the people wanted windows open and others wanted them closed because it was, I can't remember if it was too hot or too cold or whatever it was. And so there was a lot of complaining going on, and the complaining got to Hojo-san. I think at the end of sesshin, Hojo-san was rather fed up with it, and he, in his distinct way, in front of the Sangha, just basically said, whether it's 20 degrees or 120 degrees, we just sit. So he was taking away that, or at least challenging people to sit with whatever distraction they were in. I mean, your body, I think my body is the main distraction whenever I sit, no matter where I sit. And of course, there's no separation between what you're thinking and what your body is doing, but that whole idea of just be with whatever it is, wherever you are. I find myself being in a bank or in line at a grocery store and noticing how anxious I am and how much I want to get out of there and how much I'm complaining about the person in front of me taking up so much time. And then I catch myself. If I'm lucky, I catch myself. And it's just being there within your own life. So. Other comments?
I have a question. So in this treating both enemies and people close to us equally, is it really equally, or is it just with equal respect? The reason I ask is, for example, like there could be a homeless person who can knock your door and wants to stay with you, right? What would you say? Like the situations like this where you have your, let's say, children who you want to take care of, and there are like other people who needs to be taken care of, and you can spend your money only on one way, right? That these practical things, right? Like, so what would you have to say on that?
I thought it could I jump in there. I was watching a video by Muho, who's the priest at Untitled now, the temple in Japan. And he was talking about sort of why, so I guess when he first became abbot of the temple, he would let anyone come for any length of time. And then at a certain point, he said, no, I only want people that are willing to stay for 3 years. And he was describing why he made that change. And he basically said he had all these kind of freeloaders kind of coming and then causing trouble, like getting arrested for various reasons, and then he would be like brought down to, you know, account for what these people were doing. And, you know, he sort of said, yeah, it's sort of great to have, you know, this idea of treating everyone totally equally, but at the same time there are a lot of practical problems that arise for everyone as a result of that, and then I can't actually kind of take care of the people who are serious about practice. So I think that that's a really good point, and I think it gets to this idea of the balance between equality and discrimination. You know, we can't have just one or the other. That's an unbalanced situation, so it has to be some kind of balance between the two.
Welcome back, Hoko. I have a comment towards what was just said. Also, I think there's a thing called idiot compassion, kind of like no matter what bum comes up to you and asks for money, you give them money until you're destitute yourself. And I think we can do all kinds of idiot stuff like that. Just let it take over our life. So how do we foster wisdom or a skillful means to actually help people, because not, necessarily are we helping someone if we're giving them everything they need. There's maybe a way to direct them in another way, or to teach somehow without seeming like you're doing it. So I guess that's my response to that.
I have a thought too. I think I like, well, let me say something different. And when you say bum, I think that's a really interesting thing to think about. The people, not as like, this can be a mean term for a homeless person, but I think I assume you're talking about bums as in like jerks in life. And when people, we don't always know what people need. We only know what people ask for. We don't even always understand our own motivations. Sometimes we think that we're saving people, and we're just, continuing their suffering. Sometimes it's like we look at a homeless person on the street and we have certain judgments, and then we look at somebody in politics or in some other position of power who may actually be the quote unquote bum, who's like doesn't need anything from us but is asking and taking from us. So it's a really interesting question, I think, and something I really took away from Hoko's talk, which I loved, is everything sounds great, and I like the kind of pushback about just blanketly being nice, and let's all get along. And what I find really interesting is that sometimes in that conversation, there is already a value placed on maybe getting along as more valuable, or maybe more acceptable, like speaking nicely, than having anger and expressing anger, or expressing some other form of humanity that maybe isn't, or is more messy. So
Thank you all.
Other comments? Hoko, are you fully with us now? Yeah. Well, we can close out. Are folks ready to close out? Amazing times we're in right now. It's hard not to have for me, it's hard not to have a really almost ecstatic, positive feeling right now. Rather than be impartial, I'm very partial to people getting along and finding a new way. And I just felt like something that lacked in these past 4 years was compassion, compassion for the other. And I felt like there was this effort to constantly create the other. And I guess I have more hope now, somehow, that we can all come together and work through our problems. Well,
May it be so. Is my mic on now?
yes, yes, it is.
Well, I'm using my phone, which I haven't tried to do this before, but the phone apparently. So of course I've missed a number of comments, and I'm glad you all kept going and I think had a useful conversation. It's just so easy in these times. If you're mourning today, you have a certain take on things, and if you're celebrating today, you have another take on things, and it's sort of easy to forget If we're all celebrating, there are people who are not, you know, and if we're the ones who are mourning, can we also at least put ourselves a bit in the space of people who are celebrating? Last night, just before I went to bed, I heard on I was listening to a radio station, they replayed John McCain's concession speech from when he lost to Barack Obama, and it was very much about, okay, now can we see the equality? So, you know, if you're noodling on this topic today, find yourself that speech, and it's an interesting adjunct to our practice for today.
And I think it's important to keep in mind that, you know, I think we tend to assume that people in our Sangha all have the same political views, and
Yep.
I don't think that that's always the case. So we should be careful about making those assumptions.
Yep, we absolutely have to be careful in that way. So, yeah, I mean, you know, no matter where we fall on this, we have to recall that there are others who may feel differently. And this is why I say, can we put ourselves at least into that space enough to say, I recognize, you know, that somebody else has a different viewpoint, and at least have some some respect for that. So, you know, where's the common ground? So thanks everyone for carrying on today, despite my technical difficulties. I'm glad you were able to have a good practice discussion. And I'm sure this is not the last we hear of this topic.